Hello, I'm Bill Chapman, sitting in for Eric Snodgrass today, giving Eric a nice, well-deserved break. Thank you for watching today's long-range technical forecast video, brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. This analysis is being provided for perspective only, and any decision made based upon this presentation is the sole responsibility of the person making the decision. Finally, please remember that long-range weather forecast is speculative by nature. I'm going to structure this forecast where we're going to talk about what's happened in the last week or two, weather-wise, what we're looking at, what concerns we might have for the next coming weeks, and then gradually expand our outlook to longer and longer time scales. So we're actually going to include take a look at some of the dynamical models out for the next month or two, and then we'll even take a sneak peek into what we may find in coming up in autumn and early winter. So here we are we're going to start the last 7 days of precipitation just to sort of get our bearings on who's gotten the rain and who hasn't in this important time of the year here in the middle of July. So if you're up in the northern part of the country, especially in Montana and the Dakotas and western Minnesota, we've gotten a lot of rain up here over the past 7 days, even quite a bit in parts of Wisconsin. Much of the southeast has been covered by a lot of rain. If you look in the Great Plains and the Midwest and the Great Lakes, you get this little dotted pattern, very typical of July, especially if you're in a ridge. You can occasionally get a thunderstorm. If you happen to be under one of these little dots, you might get yourself a quarter to a half an inch of rain before it collapses and dies on itself. But certainly most of the area here probably not got a lot of rain during the last week or so under this ridge here. It's been warmer than average. This ridge that's been set up in Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas, New Mexico, sort of poked its way into the Great Lakes here. So it's been mostly dry here, bounded by a wetter pattern in the northern tier of states and in the southeast. So that's where we are. Places who are probably sort of getting a little nervous right now are southeastern Minnesota, a lot of Iowa, especially eastern Iowa, getting down into central and southern Illinois and Indiana and Michigan could probably start seeing some rain soon, hopefully, before our crops start to show any stress. Especially given that our temperatures over the last 15 days in these areas has been warmer than average. Again, that ridge that has normally this time of year is in the western part of the U.S. has kind of poked its nose up into the Great Lakes area here. It extends all the way through this sort of slanted from the southwest to the northeast part of the U.S. in here. Cooler than average to the north and west and the south and east, but this ridge is really causing some warm temperatures for the last couple of weeks here. So what's going to happen really quickly over the next three and a half days here? We've got a trough moving in that's going to spur on some rain, some thunderstorm activity that's going to start here in the upper Great Plains and hopefully evolve down through the Great Lakes area. Give these regions that we're concerned about in here a nice soaking before the next heat wave comes. So let's go ahead and animate this. And this is what the NAM forecast shows for precipitation total. So that trough indeed does look to be, at least according to the NAM, hitting a lot of the spots that we're most concerned about. So that's good. And not every spot is going to get the kind of rain that we want. But all in all, this is a very nice looking pattern, I'd say. According to the NAM, much of the eastern part of Iowa is going to see rain over the next few days. Northern and central Illinois, although southern Illinois, according to the NAM, is missing it. A lot of Indiana and Michigan also getting rain, and again, even though parts of Wisconsin don't need it, they're also getting the soaking too. The other notable feature here, of course, is there's this tropical system, soon-to-be tropical system. If it can get out into the Atlantic much, it should turn into a named tropical system if it can spend any time at all out into the Atlantic. And according to this, the tropical system is going to be heading just along Cape Hatteras here and then heading inland a little bit towards Pennsylvania. We're going to have to watch along some of these mountainous areas here for enhanced precipitation as this onshore flow really piles the rain up into the 4, 5, 6 inch categories here. So something to keep an eye on. Now here's the same forecast, but for the ECMWF. This is out 5 days. The ECMWF fairly similar to the NAM, but there are a couple notable differences as this trough comes through. The one I'm mostly concerned about here is that while the NAM had a good amount of precipitation in northern Iowa, the ECMWF seems to be missing that area. If they don't get this rain over the next 5 days, because we have then some more heat and humidity coming in for about a week, they're going to start to show some crop stress here. So let's hope that the NAM is right and the ECMWF is not right in this case. Again, in Illinois and Indiana and Michigan and Wisconsin, both the ECMWF and the NAM have plenty of good precipitation going on here. The European model does even bring that precipitation, pretty healthy amounts of precipitation, into southern Illinois where the NAM doesn't. So all in all, pretty good agreements, especially along the east coast here. A lot of precipitation, although the European model seems to keep it a little bit more to the east into New England rather than bringing it over Chesapeake Bay and so on. So as this trough moves in from the Dakotas, we're looking at enhanced chances of severe weather, particularly here in Nebraska and northern Kansas. There's good opportunity for maybe some damaging hail and wind with these thunderstorms that move through. Taking a look at the longer-term simulations, the forecast for the next, say, 4 to 6 weeks from the European Center model, we're starting with today, and this is the upper-level jet stream level winds. And the situation is we've got a trough here over Montana and the Dakotas, and we've got, of course, this ridge that we've been dealing with that starts down here in the New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma area, and has nosed its way over the past 3 or 4 days into the Midwest and the Great Lakes, so that this ridge, the apex of this ridge, is over Michigan right about now. So that's let this hot and humid air come into our region for the last 3 or 4 days or so, but help is on the way in the form of this trough that's going to be heading east over the next few days and eventually settle into the eastern part of the U.S. and give us a break in 2 different ways. It's going to give us a break with temperatures over the eastern part of the U.S. should be a little more mild, and the humidity levels should be down a little bit. But it will also let precipitation that has been confined to the U.S.-Canadian border, it'll let that precipitation spill in from time to time into the Great Lakes area. So let's take a look at the next few days here and watch that trough move to the east. And this is by Thursday, and this is where we're expecting the bulk of that precipitation to head on through from Minnesota and Wisconsin, and then spill down into parts of Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. And as it does then, and in the wake of that, the trough by Friday settles into the eastern part of the U.S. where it'll set up shop there for a while. So the important thing that's happened is that ridge that used to be, the axis of that ridge that used to be over, say, Michigan, has been sort of displaced back to the west by this trough here, and now the axis of this ridge has moved all the way back into Montana and Wyoming. So that's going to confine this hot and humid air to the western half of the country. Eastern half of the country, again, is getting this break from the heat and humidity, and it's allowing these storms that are firing up along the Canadian-U.S. border to kind of spill in from time to time through the Midwest and the Great Plains. So let's keep moving here, though, and see what we have in store for the next week. Notice already by Monday, we've got the axis of the ridge has already sort of started to shift back east again into Minnesota and Wisconsin. Okay, we'll take it another few days here, and by Thursday and Friday, The ridge is back to where we are right now. Its origins are in Texas and Oklahoma, and it's poked its way into the Great Plains and into the upper Midwest, so that the heat and humidity is allowed to extend back into this region. So we're looking at the end of next week being hot and humid over much of the U.S., and this heat and humidity is a notch above what we're experiencing now. Let's keep a look and see if we can get a repeat pattern and maybe another rest from the heat and humidity from another trough that comes in. So we'll move on. As we move through Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, you can see hints that the ridge axis has moved itself back into Montana and the Dakotas. And if we look a little further, there are definitely hints that that ridge has been sort of displaced back toward the west, and we get a little bit more of a northwest flow here, which probably means that there will be some troughiness setting in the eastern part of the U.S. So that heat and humidity, while it was strong, it's hopefully short-lived, maybe 3 or 4 days before we get some more breaks from a trough pattern in the east. So here we are again. Now we're approaching sort of the end, the last week in July, and we get the same pattern set up where the axis of the ridge is in the western states and trough in the east. That looks like it's going to extend all the way through the early part of August and maybe even get more solidified. So we're here in the first week of August now, and we've got sort of nice average temperatures and average precipitation values in the ridge in the eastern part of the U.S., and the ridge is sort of confined back here into the western states again. That stays the case through much of August. I'm going to keep going here. We're at the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, the middle of August, and we still have the ridge staying back mostly in the west. That's not saying that we won't ever get the heat and humidity, but it'll probably be fairly short-lived, 2 or 3 days before another trough comes in and settles into the eastern part of the U.S. Until we get back in here maybe toward the middle of August again, maybe a month, 5 weeks from now, we start to see maybe the axis of this ridge moving a little bit to the east again, but we're getting pretty far out here, and it's really not anything to worry about at this point. Maybe something to keep an eye on for the middle or the end of August. Looking at our precipitation chances, again, this is starting out a week from now, say. We'll be looking at here's starting in Tuesday, Monday and Tuesday, early next week. We've got, again, the ridge has sort of nosed its way back into the Midwest and Great Lakes area, and we're going to get that nice hot and humid air coming back in here with not much chance of precipitation during that period. Again, though, we're hoping that as trough moves in and sort of provides us a break toward the end of this week. But before that happens, this dry weather should settle in even stronger, and here it is by the end of the week, Thursday and Friday, when that ridge really sort of is at its peak in strength. We've just got really very little chance of rain, and all the chances of rain are confined to the northern tier of states here and down in the southeast. So this is going to be hot and humid and dry toward the end of next week, but then we're hoping here that as we move through toward the end of July, we start to get some of this precipitation in the northern part of the country. We get some troughs that'll build in and permit this precipitation to sort of filter down into the more southern states. So here we are on the 27th of July, 28th, 29th, and we've actually got above normal by the end of the month, above average precipitation forecast for sort of the middle third of the country, and places that were wet in the southeast are now drying out a little bit. So got sort of a pattern shift going on. For the next 2 weeks, it's going to be dry and hot in the middle part of the country and wet and hot in the southeast. But by the end of the month, we're expecting that pattern to shift 180 degrees. Now, what's going to happen as we go through August here, we expect the pattern to stay the same, where we've got sort of wet conditions through the middle of the country, because this, remember, the trough has sort of of dug in and is persisting through the east here through the beginning of August at least. And that's actually going to bring enhanced precipitation from these ridge-riding thunderstorms that come over the top of the ridge and penetrate into the eastern part of the U.S., at least through the beginning couple of weeks of August. Then as we go through more toward the end of August, again, the picture becomes a little murkier, but it still looks like, it's not going to be any kind of really strong ridging, and we're still going to have some chances of precipitation from time to time, although the south and the east stays dry. I want to take this opportunity to introduce a tool that I don't believe we've talked about in this long-range forecast before. This is a tool we've developed here at Nutrien called our Global Hotspots Forecasting Tool. And what it is, it's a statistical forecasting tool, and I'll explain how it's built and how we use it, and then show exactly what it's forecasting for the next couple of months here. So this is a statistical forecasting tool. That means it uses a long record of past historical data, and the data we choose to use are 18 different variables. Some of them are from the surface, like sea surface temperature, soil temperature, and soil moisture at a couple different levels. And then we use atmospheric variables like sea level pressure, surface air temperature, precipitation stuff, and then some upper level air temperatures, pressures, and moisture fields, even one way up in the stratosphere. So we take these 18 different variables, and what we do is we do some data mining on it. We look back through the historical record for relationships between a variable in one place and the same variable or another variable in different places. And we do this all over the globe. So for every location on Earth, if I'm looking at a location in, say, the middle of Iowa, I'll look back through the historical record for local, either nearby, other Iowa data, or remote. It could be somewhere in the South Pacific where there's some relationship between what's going on at some level of the atmosphere and the weather in this part of Iowa. So we'll sort of note all these different relationships for every point on the Earth, and then we apply those relationships to whatever's going on currently around the globe to arrive at some forecast for that particular point. Okay, so that's sort of a high-level view of what's going on. What this tool produces for us, though, are some maps that look like this. So this is a temperature forecast on the left for July and August. So what we're saying is here in early July, can we forecast what's going on for the month of July and August for 2020? And this is the temperature map that this statistical tool spits out for us. And just focusing on, say, what the forecast is according to this statistical model for July and August, well, some of it may look familiar, and others of it you might scratch your head a little bit, as do we when this comes out. So it's forecasting warmer than normal temperatures across maybe the northern half of the U.S. It's forecasting right now a warmer than average July and August in the western third of the country, and that's really not how it's been thus far through July. We've been at or below normal temperatures in here. So something will have to change if this forecast is to be right over the rest of July and through August in the western part of the country. Same going on right in here right now. This has been probably warmer than average in this area or near average, and this is forecasting slightly cooler than average in New Mexico, Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. The rest of this looks, it's on track, I'd say, being correct through the next month or two. We'll have to keep an eye on it. Other areas of the world, definitely over Siberia, there's been warmer than average temperatures through parts of the first part of July in here. So, I expect going forward that this is probably a fair bet to be right. Looking through for the precipitation forecast, again, this is July and August average precipitation forecast. And it's important to note here, this is as a percent of average. Okay, so if you see something that looks like, for example, here, this is showing above average precipitation forecast in New Mexico and Arizona and Colorado and so on. There's not a lot of precipitation that typically happens in July and August, so even though this looks like a pretty big bullseye of enhanced precipitation, 100% above average is still not a lot of precipitation in this area. So if they get any precipitation for July and August, this blue area might actually be forecast correctly then. We're expecting for all of July and August to be dry along the western part of the U.S., dry along the north. Again, that has not been the case so far. It's been fairly wet along the northern border. So if this is going to end up being correct, we expect probably through the end of July and all through August to be fairly dry up in here. That's only if this is going to validate here, this forecast. So, and then through the rest of the country, I'd say near or slightly, maybe a little bit slightly above average precipitation, except down in Florida and along the Gulf Coast area where this is forecasting below average. Interestingly in here, and this surprised me a little bit, that this statistical model is seeing below average precipitation forecast sort of all along this hurricane corridor here, including along the coast, where many of the models, the dynamical models, are showing enhanced precipitation in this area, maybe enhanced tropical activity. So again, we'll have to see what happens here through July and August. This forecast could be a bust and the dynamical models may get it right, but as of right now, the statistical model is not seeing the same kind of enhanced tropical activity that the dynamical models are forecasting right now. And that's the real important point of this as we go through and talk about how we use these. This is independent input, meaning that we've got those dynamical models, the models run by the GFS in the US, and the Europeans run the ECMWF model. This is 100% independent of that. Okay, so the way we use this is we say, well, if we can find some things that match up perfectly between the dynamical models and the statistical model. Here, our statistical model, say the warmth in the northern part of the country, that's seen in both the dynamical models and our statistical model. Well, that gives us a confidence boost that could, maybe bet on here. Maybe that we're expecting, we're pretty confident that these temperatures in the northern part of the U.S. are going to be warm. Places where they disagree, like enhanced precipitation in the tropics or tropical activity, well, that maybe say, even though we'll report and show what the dynamical models show, we may say, well, we're not putting we're not real confident in that because our statistical model is showing something completely different. And the other way we use this is what may emerge in the second month here. So the dynamical models usually have definitely some notable skill for the first month. After you get out past a month, though, those dynamical models are hit or miss. So a lot of times we'll kind of then look or hedge our bets a little bit more toward these statistical models and say, so while the dynamical models are showing throughout July we're going to have below normal temperatures in the western third of the country, maybe our statistical forecast, since it's a combination of July and August, will say, well, we expect this to maybe turn around in August and heat to build in the west, enough so that it will even surpass whatever coolness there was in July and make up for that and turn this into a warmer average. So now let's take a look even further out. Eric showed in his last video that there have been a lot of warm weather in the first 6 months of the year in Siberia and even extending out into the Arctic Ocean here. A lot of warmth in this part of the world for that first 6 months, and he showed then how this has impacted the Arctic sea ice. And as you can see here, through April, May, June, we've had a lot of melting of the Arctic sea ice, and so that we're now, for this particular date, we are at a record low. So that warmth up in Siberia has certainly been a big contributor to that here. Now, I have here an animation that I put together here that's showing the sea ice in the Arctic Here we are. This is a map looking down at the North Pole. Here's Greenland. Here's the United States, Canada. Here's Alaska. Here's Siberia, where it's been really warm. So this is the sea ice here. I'm going to go back to the beginning of this. This is what the sea ice looked like on June 18th. The white areas are 100% covered by ice. The blues are down in the 90% area covered by ice, so there's some cracks and melted areas of the ice. And as you get into the greens and yellows, you get down into the 50 and 40 and 30% covered with ice. So basically, most of the Arctic was covered with ice about 3 weeks ago. Some parts over here by Siberia were already starting to melt. Okay, so that's due to this excessive heat there was. I'm going to flip through here. This is the 3 weeks that have happened since June 18th. So I'll animate through here really quickly. It's kind of, you might find it interesting to see how this ice has melted over this time. So I'm going to just keep doing this. So let's pay attention right now to what's gone on over here by Siberia. And you can see how this ice is melted and blown away from the coast. Show that a couple of times here. I'll also point out here, if we go back to the beginning, let's take a look at sort of this area right in here, near, including the North Pole. While it's solid ice basically at the beginning of this, notice in the last few days, there's started to been quite a bit of melt, and even extending up toward the North Pole, so that we're down into the 90 and even 80% coverage with ice. So we're going to have to watch this pretty closely here. I don't think this is all going to melt away in the next couple of months, but it certainly looks a lot more degraded than it did a few weeks ago. And the other thing maybe to note is sort of how the ice is starting to blow and melt away from all the coastal regions as we go through here. So you can see in the last few days, it's really starting to pull away from the coast. Now, why do we care about this? Well, we care about this because in the summertime, usually if this ice is around, it's generally fairly white. It's got snow on the top of it from winter. It's highly reflective, okay? And we're here near the summer solstice, where the sun is up 24 hours a day. It's not at a really high angle, but it's high enough that most of the time, in most years, when this is white with snow and ice cover, that sunlight will just bounce off back into space. Well, what's happening is we're exposing more of this dark ocean here to this relatively strong sunlight this time of year in July, and even as you get into the beginning of August, the sun is still up in the Arctic. So this ocean here, as you expose it, is absorbing that heat, that sunlight. So what's going to happen is when we get into fall, depending on how far and where the ice opens to expose the underlying ocean, depending on where that is, a lot of that heat is going to get stored up during these summer months. Right now that's happening. Heat is getting stored into these upper parts of the ocean here, so that when winter comes, or at least fall comes back in September, October, and these land areas start to cool off and get covered by snow in Alaska, Canada, Siberia, it's going to go down to temperatures will be around 0 in many of these parts in October and November. What's going to happen is these places that got cleared away will still be at 33 degrees Fahrenheit or something, relative, compared to 0 degrees in other places. So you're going to have, because they haven't, they stored up all this heat and they've yet to lose that heat and start to freeze up yet. So these will have, what's left over here are some, large areas. It could be, I'm guessing this autumn you'll have a large area right about in here where of relatively warm water during October and November. Now what that'll do is that can actually change the flow of the atmosphere, so that if we've got, a jet stream that typically might just come, racing around the globe like this, we might get the jet stream to come up over this warm pocket of the ocean and then dive down in here or something, and then form another ridge here. So wherever this warm water sets up because the ice is moving away, we're going to need to watch that as the months go on here and we head into early autumn to see how that's going to affect the atmosphere when we get into early and middle of autumn here. That's all we have for this week's long-range forecast. Make sure to check in with Eric tomorrow morning for the short-range outlook. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.